Hello, welcome to Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota. I'm Katya. Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota is a nonprofit organization based in the state of Minnesota in the United States. The Human Rights Forum is a program hosted by Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota about different topics, events, and issues around the globe with the goal of educate us about important topics. The event is free and open to anyone. If you want to learn more about CGS Minnesota work, please visit our website, www.globalsolutionsmn.org, and follow us on Twitter, CGS_MN, and Facebook page, it's Global Solutions MN. Today, we will be talking about immigration, which is a topic that inspires passion. Our guest speaker is Michelle Rivero, the director of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs in the city of Minneapolis. After 18 years as an immigration attorney, in 2018, Michelle accepted the challenge to serve the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. In the office, her work includes developing support programs tailored for foreign-born residents, promoting awareness about immigration policies, and connecting immigrants and refugees to existing services. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our guest speaker, Michelle Rivero.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, Katya. I'm very grateful to Global Solutions Minnesota for welcoming me to speak here with you today. Can you all hear me? Super, wonderful. I'll talk thank you. I'll talk just a little bit about my own family background, my own immigration history. And then talk a little about human rights and immigration. I'll share some information about our migrant, immigrant, and refugee population in Minneapolis. Different types, a little bit of information about different types of immigration status, the work of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, current immigration issues of note, and how we can work together to create a sense of belonging in our community. So it's a tall order, it's a lot of ground to cover, but I think we can do it together. I welcome any questions that you have throughout. I feel that in these presentations, I end up learning as much as I share. And so I can imagine that there is a wealth of experience in this virtual room. So invite you to share your perspectives, to ask your questions. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. First, a little bit of background about me and my family. I am the daughter of immigrants from Colombia and Italy. My father is from Colombia, my mother's from Italy, and they both immigrated to the United States as adults. So had lives in their home countries before making new lives here in the United States. And for me, the fact that I'm the child of immigrants has really motivated a lot of my work, my professional life, because I wouldn't exist were it not for the significantly more generous immigration policies that were in effect in the United States in the 1960s. So that's kind of some orientation about me and what I bring to my role here in the city of Minneapolis. As Katya said, I was an immigration attorney before I started working for the city. And now a significant amount of my time and the work of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs is dedicated to promoting immigrant and refugee inclusion in the city of Minneapolis. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But first, just to briefly touch on the concept of human rights and immigration specifically and the connection between the two. Because I know we've got Christy here, bless you. I'm going to rely on Christy as a human rights law expert to share at any moment you want to jump in. But I think just as a brief orientation, what do the two have to do with each other? Because for some of us, really, it feels like there isn't a connection between human rights and immigration and immigrant rights. And given that December 10th is Human Rights Day, December 18th is International Migrants Day. We just this past Sunday recognized United Nations Day when the United Nations Charter went into force. I think it's so opportune to kind of think about immigration and immigration rights in the context of human rights and rights that we all share. And I think a very beautiful passage is Article 1 of the human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And it kind of gives me a chill saying it. They're endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. And when we think about that Article 1 and how important it is, we think about helping people identify and find a sense of belonging in this country. And that's really fundamental to the work of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. I think it's fundamental to the welcoming ideal that's embodied in our country and here in Minnesota and in the city of Minneapolis. And so I think it's a very beautiful orientation for our conversation today. I'd like to kind of jump off to talking a little bit about our migrant, immigrant, and refugee population here in the city of Minneapolis. And I just want to share that most of the information that I'll be talking about today is available on the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs webpage, which you can find by typing in OIRA, O-I-R-A, Minneapolis. So there's a wealth of information about our immigrant and refugee residents, the services that are provided through the city, and work of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs there. But briefly, some high-level information about our migrant, immigrant, and refugee communities in Minneapolis. According to 2019 estimates, we have about 63,300 residents of the city who were born outside of the United States. That's approximately 15% of the population of the city of Minneapolis. And thank you so much, Katia, for putting in the webpage into the chat. The top 5 nationalities represented in our city are some people from Somalia, from Mexico, Ethiopia, Ecuador, and India. Additional nationalities represented in the top 15 include China, Laos, Kenya, Thailand, El Salvador, Vietnam, Canada, Germany, and Guatemala. Some noteworthy facts include that we have the largest Somali population outside of Somalia in the United States. And actually for Somali Independence Day in July, we have people coming to Minnesota, to Minneapolis from all over the world for our celebration. Economic contributions of our immigrant, refugee, and new American population include the fact that our immigrant and refugee household total income is $1.7 billion. In terms of state and local taxes paid, the amount is $159 million. So just in terms of contributions of our immigrant, refugee, and new American populations, those are so significant. And we're fortunate to have a report that came out just earlier this year in June on new Americans in Minneapolis. That's also available on the OIRA webpage that speaks to the important contributions of our immigrant, refugee, and new American residents with regard to workforce, entrepreneurship. So just as an additional statistic, and I won't drill these into the ground, just a couple of more. We have 2,700 immigrant and refugee entrepreneurs who live in the Minneapolis area in 2019, which make up 13.2% of the business owners in the metro area. Entrepreneurs generated $37.6 million in business income in 2019. So some very important contributions. And maybe, I invite people again to ask questions if you have questions throughout the remarks that I'm making today, but also kind of want to touch on immigration status briefly as in conversations I've had in community, sometimes in the spectrum of different types of immigration status that people hold doesn't seem as wide as it actually is. So often individuals kind of think about immigrants in the United States in three sort of categories: undocumented, refugees, and then people who are naturalized US citizens. And understanding that there is a wider spectrum of immigration status is very useful in understanding our population here. So often in describing the spectrum of immigration status, certainly moving from undocumented, where a person does not have a visa or valid documentation to be in the United States, to US citizenship, which is the ideal from the standpoint of you cannot be deported from the United States, except through a process of denaturalization, which is very complicated. And you have the right to vote and a number of other rights that you have as a US citizen. Often thinking about immigration status from the standpoint of does a person have temporary or permanent status in the United States? So thinking about temporary status, for example, a visitor, a person who is a student, a person who is in the United States for a temporary period of time for employment, versus someone who has more permanent status in the United States, either a green card or refugee status, which does not expire. And then after a period of time, an individual who has permanent resident status, who has a green card, may be able to apply for United States citizenship. So I'll just pause there for a second in the event that people have questions or want to share your own perspective. Again, some of you may have had your own experiences with regard to the immigration system and want to make sure that people have an opportunity to share any questions or thoughts that you'd like to before we move on.
Marina.
Thank you. Maybe I'm too ahead of what you are already talking about, but one of the things that have been worrying us, I am a green card holder, and I know a lot of people who are under, other visas, is the immigration backlog, especially in Minnesota. Minnesota right now is being considered the slowest state in the whole federation to process any type of immigration or non-immigrants or just temporary visas, being from green card holders, refugees, but especially work visas. So we do have in the Brazilian community quite a few people that are on this backlog. We know of people who now are on standby and they cannot work because their process is pending and they cannot do anything. So they are not illegal, they are just pending. So they can stay here, but they cannot bring any kind of income. I think it's very interesting what you said about the amount of immigrants that we have here in the state. And if you compare to the amount of people who lives in the state, I'm talking about 5 million people, if I'm not wrong, since the last census. So a backlog this big for Minnesota with, in comparison to the amount of immigrants that actually live here and work here, is not that big. You know, we cannot, like other states like California, they are processing, California, Texas, they're processing way more immigrants in 7 months, 9 months top. And the backlog for any type of visa here in Minnesota are between 20 months to 32 months.
Thank you so
Right.
much for sharing that observation, Marina. You know, the immigration backlogs, both with regard to people applying for benefits with US citizenship and immigration services, as well as people who are trying to obtain an immigration benefit in immigration court proceedings, where the timeline to obtain a final determination is quite lengthy as well, is one of the largest challenges that immigrant and refugee and new American residents are experiencing. And one question that I would ask, you know, it does sound like you have been communicating with others with regard to the backlog that impacts Minnesota residents. And that information is so crucial for our policymakers, including elected representatives. I do know that the backlog and the cause of the backlog from the standpoint of the need for additional resources at the Department of Homeland Security, at USCIS, to process cases more quickly is a subject of discussion, both within the Biden administration and also in Congress. And I wonder, if I may ask, if there is advocacy that you're aware of within the employment-based community regarding this specific topic, and if you might be willing to share a little bit more with regard to that, not necessarily here, but you know, offline as well, because I know that having details around how the backlogs impact specific individuals and their employers is crucial information that helps make the case for advocacy on a congressional level and at the executive level as well.
I cannot speak for other people. We do have a group. Katya is also part of the same group, so she is aware of the people that I'm talking about. I shall not say their names, you know, because it's a private matter, of course, but it is common. It's so bad. It's so bad that is even a joke, like we are all, you know, locked down in Minnesota. That's what is going on, because people cannot renew their visas, they cannot work, they can also not travel. So you cannot even like leave the country just to visit your parent, because it means abandon of your status or your visa. So we cannot go ahead. And I know that is going on with a lot of people. As I said, I do understand that USCIS is under funded. I do also understand that there were, with the previous government, they create a invisible wall for immigration, and it made everything worse. And then you have the humanitarian crisis, you know, on the borders. We are all aware of all of this. We understand that Afghan people are priority right now as Haitians. We are saying it's okay, but the problem is right now in the state of Minnesota specifically, that is absolutely we cannot even understand why it's taking so long. Because if you go just, you know, for processing visas on the USCIS website and you check the backlog for that, you're gonna compare all the other service centers, and here, you know, is the worst. But there are not that many people living here, and being, you know, not as funded as it should be, or people lacking of employment, or people, you know, working for the USCIS here, and I know they are having problems. It's still very strange for us because there is no transparency why Minnesota is so slow. So there is nothing published about it. And all of us are in the USCIS websites, you know, trying to find out what's going on. And don't get me wrong, immigration here, the officers are all very nice and they are very, very good people and they want to help, but I don't think the process is transparent enough.
Thank you for sharing that, Marina. And if I could share that with regard to specific matters, if people feel like residents of Minnesota are being disproportionately impacted by the USCIS backlog, I'm happy to communicate with individuals who are experiencing problems and would also suggest as an additional point of contact our congressional representatives. So in the city of Minneapolis, that would include Representative Ilhan Omar, would also include our US senators, Senator Amy Klobuchar and Senator Tina Smith, who all have liaisons with USCIS. So if this is a systemic problem, I know that those offices would want to know about it as well and can do individual case inquiries. But if they're seeing a number of cases, can elevate the issue and try and obtain more information with regard to the cause. So I welcome, if you'd like to reach out to me, or I'm not sure if you have reached out to the congressional offices already.
So that's one thing, because I'm a green card holder. And my husband is American, so he's a voter, but I am in another lane. When you see, I can try to reach out to the congresswoman or, the senator, but what to do when you are here with your family and they are under an L visa, a work permit, they are not the voters. They can reach out to any kind of politician that could help them out, because they're not voters. Therefore, they are here on a specific visa. They might stay, they might leave. Who knows, the company might say, I want to keep you here. Yeah, I'm going to finance, I'm going to sponsor your green card. But this is a limbo that is not clear enough on who we can talk to, and even though USCIS explains very well over the phone, you have to wait until you reach out to people. But the problem is, every month the backlog is getting worse. So when they say like, okay, you gotta wait because the minimum amount would be 8 months, then it turns into 15, then it turns into 18 months. So you are never out of the range that they give us, So that's why I'm asking you, I'm being honest with you, because I'm taking this opportunity with you to educate myself. So maybe especially Katia, and I think Katia is the point of contact for the Brazilian community in this matter, and we can actually give you a lot of numbers or people, but we need a little more knowledge about how it works.
Yep, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I think that it's really helpful to understand the challenges that people are experiencing in order to identify solutions. And I can speak from the standpoint of being a representative for the city of Minneapolis, that part of the reason that this office was created, part of the reason that we have relationships with legal service providers is a recognition that immigrants are residents, immigrants, refugees, migrants, new Americans are residents of this city, and that it is in the best interest of our shared community to ensure that people have access to methods for obtaining more secure immigration status in the United States, and connections to resources around the city and other multi-jurisdictional resources, whether it be Hennepin County, whether it be our elected officials at the state or federal level, and that having an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs is a useful touch point to ask and receive answers to questions like what you're asking today. With regard to additional services that the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs provides or connects people to, the city does have relationships with 4 immigration legal service providers. Those are the Advocates for Human Rights, Volunteer Lawyers Network, Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, and Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota. And these organizations provide a variety of immigration legal services and are a point of contact for people who are trying to obtain more secure immigration status, whether they're petitioning for permanent residence or US citizenship, or sponsoring a family member, or applying for asylum, or in immigration court proceedings and need representation. And certainly over the course of the last 4 years during the Trump administration, where there were over 1,000 immigration developments, the vast majority of which were harmful to our immigrant and refugee residents, to the transition to the Biden administration, where we're seeing rollbacks on some of those some of those very damaging policy initiatives, but are still seeing critical needs that remain unaddressed at present, that touch our immigrant and refugee residents. There's still a critical need for immigration legal services, and there's a recognition on the part of the city that there are many people who are not able to pay for the services of an immigration attorney, and that should not be a barrier to being able to remain in the United States when you have a valid basis for being able to remain in the United States and a method of obtaining immigration status. So thank you again for that comment. I really appreciate the questions and the thoughts that you shared, and would invite others, if you have information to share or questions to ask before we move on to the next section. I wanted to talk a little bit about current topics, including Afghan evacuees, but just wanted to make sure if people had questions, that they're able to ask them.
Fred?
I had a comment and a question. My comment to Marina in part is, so I've managed business immigration for companies I've worked for them, and I've been in-house counsel for a long time. And regardless of the administration, what was challenging to tell all of our foreign workers was, please don't look at the federal website. Don't. And so your comment regarding process is really key, and especially now with the amount of data that should be current, but isn't. It's such a political tool. So a lot of the backlogs would magically get caught up in an election year. And depending on how many different H-1B workers mainly, and then usually after 3 years, we'd switch them over to a green card. It was amazing to me how people would watch all the time, and you can't keep people from talking, and you can't keep a group like the Brazilian group you're talking about. And for me, it was a lot of Indian technology workers and so on. I mean, groups of people talk to each other, and when 1 month you see that it's current and the next month you see that it's 24 months behind, you're like, how is that even possible? And operationally, that's just sloppy, and that shouldn't happen, because it's people's lives. And so operationally, no business could have their budget or their production cycle, if they're a manufacturer, vary that much month to month, and telling customers that, oh yeah, you know, your product should be delivered in 2 weeks. Oh, I'm sorry, it's going to be 3 months. Oh, I'm sorry, it's going to be, 5 weeks, and go back and forth. That just, you can't run a business that way. So the comment is really just that idea of transparency that you're talking about, and knowing that the USCIS is actually working. The people there are actually, give or take last year in particular with the pandemic. But if you have people going into the office or working virtually and doing their jobs, and they're processing, what else is happening, that report that comes out every month is that messed up, because it's really frustrating, and it creates a lot of anxiety. So just kind of a business perspective that I've noticed, and I was with a consulting firm back in the late 90s where we had hundreds of H-1Bs that we were doing, and everyone coming in to help solve I2K. And anyway, it's dealing with people on a level that is unfair because it's so tied to politics. A lot of the time for this that come out. The question is just something that I've never looked up and thought about, but one of the statistics you brought up was interesting for me. How are undocumented immigrants calculated? Like, how do you know how many or estimate how many are actually in the state?
Thank you so much for that question. You know, I think that it is very difficult to create or identify an accurate number of individuals because there is the inherent, you know, who would report that they are undocumented, right? And I know that there are there's some survey data. American Community Survey, I think, is one resource that's used. The report that we received earlier this year was from an organization called New American Economy. And the information is in, the report was put out, let's see, in June of this year. And I'll just put some information about New American Economy into the chat. So I do believe that some of the data used was census data, and I know that that was a subject of quite a bit of back and forth during the Trump administration of having a citizenship question. So appreciate the question. Can include information about New American Economy into the chat, but I understand that the estimate for state of Minnesota is approximately 190 to 100,000, but I'm not exactly sure how that figure came to be. If others have insight to share on that, would be grateful for the opportunity to learn more. I do know that New American Economy has some quite an impressive data analysis team that comes up with statistics. And I believe that American Community Survey is one of the resources that they use to sort of estimate the undocumented population. And for the city of and the report that came out earlier this year has information about different types of immigration status, including number of permanent residents who may not yet have taken the step to US citizenship. And I think that's around 10,000 individuals, and undocumented population around 15,000 individuals.
Thank you.
So were there any other questions or comments or thoughts that people wanted to share based on experiences that you've had? I can speak briefly to some of the initiatives that are ongoing at the city of Minneapolis to promote immigrant and refugee inclusion, and also to ensure the community is aware of immigration-related developments. Along with the city of St. Paul, we co-host a bi-weekly immigration forum. Given the many developments that came out, starting with the very beginning of the Biden administration, ensuring that community had a space to learn about different immigration developments, and also have the opportunity to communicate with our immigration legal service providers seem very important. So since March, actually, we've hosted a bi-weekly, which is a good resource to get up-to-date information regarding subjects such as Hong Kong deferred enforced departure, for example, the Liberian Refugee and Fairness Act, updates regarding Afghan evacuees, and the Operation Allies Welcome. So if you're interested in participating in the forum to join, and the link is on the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs webpage. With regard to additional immigrant and refugee inclusion initiatives, the city of Minneapolis, along with the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, is involved in a one-year initiative called Gateways for Growth, which is an initiative to identify what recommendations we can present to our city council that strengthen our immigrant, refugee, and new American communities. Information about that is on the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs webpage. And we also are working with a number of nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, advocacy organizations to identify a variety of different thematic areas, including connected communities, safe communities, civic engagement, economic and workforce development, what strategies we can implement that have a measurable impact on our immigrant, refugee, and new American communities. With regard to current events, certainly thinking about the differences between the previous administration and the current administration, while there are positive developments, there's certainly still a significant amount of work to do to ensure that individuals who are in the United States now have the opportunity to obtain immigration status. One of the focal areas of interest relates to Afghan evacuees, and I can briefly talk about that subject. At present, in the state of Minnesota, there are a bit over 100 individuals from Afghanistan who have entered the United States. The operation, the federal operation is called Allies Welcome. Individuals who come into the United States are placed in military bases around the country for initial processing that includes vaccinations and screenings. People who enter the United States from Afghanistan as part of this operation the majority enter as parolees. So individuals who have a temporary period of status in the United States. It's a 2-year period of status where people have access to work authorization, the right to be in the United States. And from the military bases, people are relocated to states around the country. There's a Minnesota Allies Welcome effort, and I can put some information from the State Department of Human Services website in the event that people are interested in providing support or interested in learning more about the initiative and identifying ways to plug in. And I'll just put that in here in a moment. Sorry, I'm just pulling it up here. There's also an event tomorrow hosted by the Advocates for Human Rights that may be interesting to individuals interested in learning more about the operation and Afghan evacuees coming to the United States. So I just put information from the Department of Human Services webpage into the chat, and that information is maybe helpful to people who are interested in learning more about the relocation of Afghan evacuees to Minnesota. There are, I guess, one last thing to kind of touch on is what people can do to support work touching immigrant and refugee communities in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities and beyond. Certainly increasing our basis of knowledge and learning more about local issues, using our skills and connections to create a welcoming community, reaching out to refugee resettlement organizations, which have robust volunteer needs and can help identify opportunities, connecting with community-based organizations, and also connecting with legal service providers, including the ones that are listed on the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs webpage. And I'm just going to try and pull that up so that you can see, and we'll navigate the site a little bit. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Super. So there's information here relating to our legal service providers, immigration updates, some statistical information regarding immigrants in Minnesota, information about the Gateways for Growth initiative, and we also have a page on Afghan evacuees in Minnesota. And I'll just click on that quick. Information about the Operation Allies Welcome, the federal initiative, the state law, and then some donation and volunteer here. To the legal organizations that the city partners with, contact information for those organizations is here as well. And then regarding programming, in addition to connecting people with immigration legal service providers, part of the work of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs is also to host events that celebrate and recognize our immigrant and refugee community, including Immigrant Heritage Month, World Refugee Day, Human Rights Day, and International Migrants Day. Our events calendar is here, and the bi-weekly immigration forum that I referenced, while we do not record the forums, we do have notes, and the notes are accessible here in the events calendar.
May I ask a question? That's
sure, of course.
Last time, I think that maybe I was even in a conversation, Zoom with you. We were talking about the resettlement of the children that were coming, who may not have parents down at the border, the Mexican border, and that Minnesota was going to be working on kind of a robust resettlement of children. Did we, or what was the status?
You know, I appreciate that question, Christy, and I am honestly, I don't have an update there with regard to Minneapolis-based work. I do know that the Advocates for Human Rights has done work on this subject in terms of representing individuals who are separated from their family members. I would need to check in with them to find out if there's an update there. I do know that there are children who remain separated from their parents, and that from a federal standpoint, that it was one of the initial initiatives laid out by the Biden administration to ensure that families are reunited. And there's actually a task force implemented with requirements to report back. And I believe it was within a pretty abbreviated period of time. So can pull that up and put information into the chat. But I do know that there's some tracking that was happening at a federal level. With regard to state or local, I don't have an update to provide. I'm not sure whether there's been additional work, but I do know that the Advocates for Human Rights is a good point of contact as an organization that's been involved in representing individuals who were separated from their parents.
And is there one agency, isn't it? And is it your agency or some other in Minneapolis or that is tracking on a daily basis, like who is coming and the numbers, and that should have some of this, or no?
So with regard to certain populations, for example, the refugee population, that would be the State Department of Human Services, which is responsible for resettling individuals who ultimately find a home in Minnesota. That is one population though, right? Refugees who come into the United States. With regard to people who hold different types of immigration status, that is an excellent idea. Identifying like who, and there are challenges there. Because while knowing what type of immigration status a person holds and what our population is composed of, and people with various immigration status, that information can also be very harmful if in the hands of individuals who may have less intention. And one challenge with collecting data is if have specific data regarding different populations, including people who may not have immigration status in the United States, that data be used. It's an excellent question. It's a great area to obtain more information. I know that organizations such as Wilder Foundation do excellent research. The State Demographer's Office as well. If you have information to share regarding your own work and information that would be helpful, a repository of information, please do share, because we love to learn about additional resources.
I'm not sure, but it just reminds, especially with the vulnerable children that were coming. I mean, my fear, they aren't, if there isn't an agencies themselves as being the first year, easily could be going into, as we know, although there's good foster care systems, there also are people that are not in good situations, and then many children are definitely vulnerable, and then can, the whole links to trafficking or disappearances. And I know Minnesota, since we're really been raising, the issues around the disappearances or killings of Indigenous Black women, and yeah, so I guess I'm just, and I understand there's also the side of, oh wait, no, people who are anti-immigrant are going to start seeing these numbers, and they're going to challenge migration, different immigration status issues. But then on the other side, it's like, you don't know, and if there isn't an agency that's responsible for protecting, and I understand government, as we know, has sometimes these both positive and perceived negative roles in protection. Yeah, so anyhow, I'm just raising some of the human rights challenges on both sides of the aisle, whether it's political aisle or within a human rights context, and safety and health and well-being.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Christy. And really, like, it's an opportunity for greater collaboration between agencies and offices. And frankly, I've been an employee of the city of Minneapolis for 3 years. And one of the things that's been most rewarding about this work is the opportunity to collaborate with individuals who are interested in supporting community with Minneapolis Public Schools, for example, with the Hennepin County Office of Multicultural Services. We're very fortunate to have at the state level, at the Department of Employment and Economic Development, an Assistant Commissioner for Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, and really viewing our work together, even if we are just one person in whatever department or office we're in, like working together to collaborate, because we recognize that there are gaps, and it's helpful to ensure that people don't fall through the cracks, to work together, that is a goal. And speaking to specifically to the challenges that may be faced by unaccompanied minors or children who do not have a connection to a parent or a trusted family member, who may be in a more vulnerable situation. I know that that Minneapolis Public Schools has been a point of contact for me in terms of ensuring that we're connecting people with legal service providers, and also identifying other wraparound services, and how to make that systematic. You know, that is a challenge. And to my knowledge, that does not exist yet, but the pieces are there from the standpoint of the interested individuals and organizations that can play a role. So welcome further conversation on this subject, and thank you so much for your comments and your insights. So maybe, you know, I just kind of wanted to close with this idea, which is the topic of migration being a normal human activity. I think many of us have moved from one place to another. I can share that I migrated from New York, where I was born, to New Orleans, where I lived from the ages of 6 to 17, then, you know, Minnesota, then Chicago, and then back to Minnesota. And moving to a place where you can experience greater opportunity, or because you can't live in safety in your home country, is so fundamental to being human, and ensuring that all communities offer opportunities for newcomers to experience a sense of belonging is really fundamental to upholding human rights, and is part of the work of the city and the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And maybe I could just close with that working together to foster a sense of belonging in our community is something that really requires all of us working together and reaching out to people who may have different viewpoints from us, right? But we share this humanity, and maybe I'll leave it at that. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today. I really look forward to continuing this conversation and answering questions that you might have, and hope that you'll reach out to me even after this conversation too, to talk about how we can work together to promote immigrant and refugee inclusion in the city.
That's so wonderful. I feel like we could spend the entire week talking to you and still learning. Do we have any questions from the attendees? Gail.
Well, you know, I'm concerned about what's happening at the border, because, you know, you hear these reports about, I don't know, thousands of especially Haitians, trying to apply for refugee or immigrant status. And it sounds like there's always a crisis at the border. I'm wondering what the status is.
I'm so glad that you brought up that question. You know, some reports have recently come out about the situation at the border. There was one that was published by Human Rights Watch recently. There's been an increase of individuals seeking entry into the United States. With regard to the Haitian situation in September, you know, there was a camp in Del Rio, Texas, and thousands of individuals were forcibly removed from the camp. There were some extremely disturbing images and a significant amount of outrage with regard to how the Border Patrol was treating individuals, not to mention the fact that people who are potentially asylum seekers were deported to Haiti. And there were some reports also that some of the individuals deported were in fact not Haitian, but citizens of other countries. One takeaway, I think, that may be useful to consider is, you know, the Biden administration in the first few weeks emitted a flurry of executive orders, memoranda, you know, really clearly attempting to show a break from the previous administration. As the months have progressed, we have seen some things that have remained the same, that have not changed. Using Title 42 to prevent people from entering the United States on health-related grounds is one of them. You know, initially, the Biden administration did not expand the number of refugees that they would intend to resettle in fiscal year 2021. They were going to leave it at Trump's 15,000, which is the lowest ever. But due to pressure from community, the Biden administration increased that number, even though they couldn't reach it, even though they couldn't reach 60,000 within fiscal year 2021. They still at least stated that the refugee cap would be 60,000. And really that was a response to concerted and vocal public pressure on the administration. So I just mentioned that because I do believe that in situations such as the experience that people had at the border in September of being removed from the United States, the terrible conditions in Haiti right now. I mean, it is extremely dangerous. That if there are situations that spark outrage, that communicating the way you feel in as many places as possible can be very effective. With regard to your broader question of the situation at the border, you know, the fact that it's in the news and that there's it's described as a crisis. Really, there are some fundamental questions there regarding the choices that this administration is making and the choices that we Americans would like our governments to make. I'm happy to speak further about this subject. As I said, kind of at the outset, given that I'm the product of more generous immigration policies and more humane immigration policies, that kind of motivates my thinking and my work. I think about individuals who qualify for asylum, who are being refused entry in this country. And I find that extremely problematic. But happy to talk further. Forgive me, I'm not sure if I really answered your question or not.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot of the immigrants on our border are there because of US policies toward their countries. Also, that pertains to Haiti. The US overthrew President Aristide, democratically elected president of Haiti, overthrew President Zelaya of Honduras. And so we have a lot of Hondurans on our border. NAFTA trade policies led to a lot of Mexican immigrants. And so I'm wondering if there's a way that there can be more attention to that by maybe putting pressure on the US government to say, well, these immigrants are a result of US foreign policy. Therefore, the US government has a responsibility, more responsibility than usual, you know, to accept larger numbers than usually would be considered, you know, the norm from those countries. That would not only maybe help to raise the quotas for those populations, but also would give more attention to the link between those things with the American public, who otherwise would just see these people on the border and you know, think, oh, well, they have just governments perhaps, and feeds into stereotypes about global South countries and global South people. You see what I'm getting at here? Would be that,
I definitely do.
yeah.
Yeah. I think sometimes those connections are more clear than other times, you know. For example, the relationship between the United States and Afghanistan is a significant portion of the US population that recognizes and feels very strongly that we have a debt, you know, and part of the reason why the Operation Allies Welcome is even entitled Operation Allies Welcome is a recognition of the relationship between, you know, Afghan residents and the United States. In other situations like the one that you are describing, the United States interactions, perhaps there is a more attenuated, in terms of the American public, there's a more attenuated link, really, and that relationship, that cause and effect that you're describing is not as clear. And so there are always opportunities to learn more. And really the question is how to ensure that people are aware of that relationship to the degree that it influences decision-making with regard to people having access to immigration status in the United States. And then there's the question after that of can communities welcome those individuals? Like, could a community say, you know, we want to welcome individuals from such and such countries because we feel like we do have a responsibility to them, which is an interesting topic to explore as well. But thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights.
I wonder, Michelle, if there are individuals that look for your office help in any way, and then you needed to find an organization that can provide that help that they are looking for, or usually people who are usually refugees or any immigrants that are in need, they find their way into the organizations on their own. So do you have both, or what happens?
So I'd say it's both. You know, I think that some individuals reach out directly, and I connect them with either immigration legal service organizations or other entities around the city. For example, we have a civil rights department. If a person is interested in filing a complaint or has experienced a wage theft issue, if we have a senior advisor for the prevention of human trafficking. So for human trafficking related concerns, I would direct people there. Certainly our legal service organization partners do a significant amount of outreach, and so some people connect with them directly. Another important resource are community-based organizations that work within a variety of different communities, and our legal service partners have relationships with some immigrant-led, community-based organizations as well. And certainly faith-based institutions as well are a resource and connector to help people access immigration legal services and additional services as well. I can also say that in addition to the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, at Hennepin County, there is an Office of Multicultural Services, which is a very robust resource for immigrant, refugee, and new American residents, providing a variety of different services, including helping people navigate different social services that might be available in the Hennepin County area. So I think that people connect in a variety of different ways. It's always a challenge. And there are always gaps, and we're always working to identify more effective ways to reach a larger portion of our immigrant and refugee population. So welcome insights or suggestions from anyone in the group on connecting with residents in the city to ensure that they have access to the rich resources that exist not only in Minneapolis, but across the state.
I have another question. In the beginning, I opened saying that immigration conversation inspires passion, and of course, it's not secret to anybody how this country is divided in opinions about how immigration should be handled, or how immigrants should or not be allowed in this country. And of course, there is some portion of need of education, lack of education, ongoing. And I see several comments that are rude and violent towards immigrants and people seeking for immigration and for refuge. And actually I needed to say, because I'm in human rights, and I always think about people who are leaving their home countries. Nobody wants to, and I had the opportunity to say that before, but nobody leaves their countries for nothing. They leave because there is war, because there is persecution. There are people that leave because their country is killing LGBTQ or persecuting, putting them in jail. Women are suffering, violence. Also, and there are wars in several countries. Nobody actually wants to. Many of these people, if not majority or everybody, they are leaving because there is a big reason. I imagine how painful it is to walk and cross several countries on foot with a baby in the hand. Nobody does that if they are in a good position in their own home countries. And
That's right.
so my question to you, maybe it's a little philosophical, but what do you say to the people who are who have negative thoughts of the people who are seeking, and I'm going to say especially for people who are seeking asylum, and what would you say to the people who have negative vision and thoughts about that? How do you educate, or how do you put some calm in their hearts and make them to turn around their thoughts?
I really appreciate this very challenging question. It has been my experience that you can't fight anger with anger. And I have to say I've learned that the hard way. And really, even explaining the reality of what people experience, why people come to the United States, is also sometimes unsuccessful in terms of, you know, changing people's minds. And really what I have tried to do, and I honestly can't give an example, but is find common ground from the standpoint of what can we both agree on? I don't know what it is, you know, like 3 generations back, you know, you had a family member who immigrated to the United States. Tell me about that, you know, and kind of learning more about the background of the person that I'm speaking to. When there's anger, when there's hatred, there's something behind that, and trying to understand that is my starting point, as illogical as that may seem. And I feel that when I start at that point, that what I end up saying afterwards, there's not, but there's the willingness to listen to me. If I have the willingness to listen to that person. So I'm sorry, you know, there was a specific example in my mind of where someone actually said, you know what, I'll think about that. And it was someone who had a very conservative viewpoint. And I remember thinking, that's good. You know, that's good. I mean, you could look at even our statistics. I was just looking at something from Arrive Ministries, which is one of the refugee resettlement organizations. You compare like over 100 years ago to today. In the year 1900, immigrants made up 29% of Minnesota's population, versus what, about 5 to 8% of Minnesota's population today. So we had a significantly greater percentage of immigrants in 1900 than we do today. And, you know, that's neither here nor there, but from the standpoint of people who have a very conservative view of immigration, sometimes the facts, sometimes the details don't make a difference to people. You're not gonna win an argument with facts, but by trying to find some common ground. And forgive me, I'm sorry, maybe that's not the best answer, but as I said, I feel like I've kind of learned the hard way. And I see Dick has put a comment in the chat too. who we elect is who we are. And if we don't vote, we add to the problem. Very timely. Thank you for encouraging us to vote.
True. Thank you for your answer. So I think this session, if nothing else, it would be nice. That makes us, reflect and think and try to be better versions of ourselves, if that's possible. I would like to thank everybody for attending this event. We hope this session will open the doors for more fruitful conversations. If you want to watch again, the recording can be found on our website and our YouTube channel. CGS hosts events every month. Please visit our website to learn what the next events are. In November 18, our movie discussion is Hotel Rwanda, and the guest speaker directly from Belgium is Karine Kanimba, the daughter of the man who inspired the movie, and who happens to be in prison right now. He was kidnapped from his hometown, and he's there. And I invite you to all attend and see what the family and the international organizations are doing to release Paul. In November 24, we will host a human rights forum about Yemen with the internationally awarded Fadia Tabet, a human rights advocate, who will tell us what is happening in Yemen now. And last but not least, a big special thank you for our guest speaker, Michelle Rivero. And I would like you, Michelle, to close with your final remarks.
Thank you so much, Katia. I'm so grateful to Global Solutions Minnesota for inviting me to speak today. I've appreciated the time with you. I really encourage you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you would like to talk about immigrant and refugee inclusion in the city of Minneapolis. I feel like we are all in this together, and we can be successful together. So thank you for your time today. Appreciate that we've had the opportunity to be together, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. Have everybody a wonderful week, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Mhm.